Hi, hey everyone. It's good to be here. Good to see some faces that I haven't seen in a while, and also to meet some folks that I haven't met before. Thanks y'all for being here. I'm going to share my screen. I'm kind of glad to be sharing my screen. It's a really overcast day here, and I usually depend on natural lighting, so I'm not sure how I'm appearing on the screen. As Beck stated, my name is rehshetta, and I am going to be talking about We've Been Open, Diasporic Knowledge, Radical Care, and the Illusion of Innovation. I am joining you from the US. I am a current doctoral student, just finishing up my second year of PhD life. I'm also a full-time graduate research assistant at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and really happy to be here. So let's get into it, y'all. And I hope that you all can see my screen appropriately. I want to begin with stating that I'm inviting us to think about diasporic knowledge, radical care, and what I'm calling the illusion of innovation. But specifically, what I want us to explore is how much of what we frame as new within open education has actually existed for a long time, but has not always been recognized as such. So the framing that I'm using is that within open ed practices, we often talk about openness through the ideas of like access, professional learning, equity, pedagogical transformation, all of the terms that we hear often in lots of open spaces. And I want to be clear that those commitments matter. They are very important, and we should lean into those commitments, but they are also not neutral. They're shaping the ways we are able to see and what we are able to recognize as openness. So, part of what I'm doing here is asking us to consider how those framings might also limit what counts as open. So, Lane gives us a helpful distinction between systematic and systemic change. So, as you see here in the slide, systematic change works within existing systems. As you can see, the puzzle pieces, it's saying that like being consistent, just like step by step, we can improve things within the system. We're committed to like incremental changes. We're going to make things better over time. Systemic change, however, transforms the system itself. Some folks might even say it says, let's burn the system down and let's start something new. Um, and open education resources often expand access within systems, but expansion does not necessarily change what is recognized as knowledge. So we have to start to get curious about how can we have access without fundamentally shifting how value is assigned within openness. Knowledge is power. Knowledge and power, they parallel, they work together. And to understand that, we have to recognize that knowledge is not neutral. It's shaped by histories of colonialism, by power, by systems of exclusion. So when we talk about openness, we are already operating within those structures. We're already operating within epistemic exclusion and those hierarchies. And openness exists in those systems, those structures of oppressive nature, which means openness does not exist outside of power. Instead, it is shaped by those systems. Diasporic knowledge gives us another way of thinking. So, across diasporic context, knowledge moves and flows through encounter, through exchange, through transmission. It's not stagnant, it's not fixed. It's produced through relational interactions and building community. It's shaped through movement. It's shaped through people who come in contact with one another, like we are here on this call. It's shaped through adaptation and survival. And importantly, it doesn't rely on formal recognition in order to exist. And I pulled this quote from Luis, who says, diasporic knowledge is the process of encounter, exchange, and transmission, because we know that that is similar to how openness truly works. I'm going to play just a little bit of this song, and hopefully y'all can hear it. I might not have selected to share sound, so let's see. This is what I mean by movement. When we hear music, we often will start to move. We might sway, we might nod our head. If you are someone who has the moves, you might get up and start dancing. But knowledge moves through music, and that is a form of care by encountering and exchanging. Care in this context is not just something we do. It functions as an infrastructure. It's how knowledge is carried, it's sustained, and made usable across time and space, just as this song can be used across time and space in many different contexts. So when we talk about openness, we also need to account for the role of care in making knowledge possible. So now I want to uh, talk about something that's been something that I personally have been wrestling with, and that's defining openness, defining innovation through openness. And within open ed, innovation is often recognized through things like adoption, scalability, visibility, and the ways in which institutions can use it, the uptake of it. So, in other words, innovation becomes what can be measured, what we can see, what can be replicated. And that defines what becomes legible as innovation. But in defining innovation in that way, there are some limitations. The challenges of that framework is that it cannot account for everything, it cannot hold all of openness. It does not fully capture the relational labor. So we think about just the labor that it takes to make those connections, to really relate to someone, to listen to them, and to share with them. That relational labor is not accounted for. Lineage-based knowledge, those things that have been passed down from one person to the next, and the telling of it, and the caring for it, and then passing it on to someone else, that framework does not account for that. So, what sustains learning is often what remains least visible. And what remains least visible is often what is most foundational. So I also want to talk about the contemporary patterns that we're seeing and bring us back to the ways that openness does not exist outside of power. Expanding access does not automatically transform how knowledge is recognized or valued, which means we also have to ask not just what is open, but is recognized as open. I want to um, give a story of, I'm sorry. My screen is going too fast. I want to give some examples of things that have happened to me recently. And I want to also name that these are not isolated experiences, but they are examples of a broader pattern. So, in one instance, I was nominated recently for recognition tied to work that I've been doing that engages both locally, but also global communities. The feedback I received was that the scope of the work was there. They acknowledged that it was valuable, that it was useful. They saw the impact of it, but it just did not align with what was being prioritized for recognition at that time. Again, what was being prioritized as recognition in that moment. In another instance, I was not awarded funding for a research project centered on Black and Latina women faculty with the reasoning that that work was not considered timely for this moment. For me, what became clear in both moments is that the question is not whether the work exists, because the work is there and it's being done well. I was told that it is good, it is amazing, phenomenal, even. But the question really is whether it is recognized within existing frameworks and priorities of institutions. And again, these are not isolated experiences. When I share those moments with others, especially folks who are Black or Latina who identify as women or trans or you have a disability, similar patterns emerge across very different contexts. So, what we are seeing is not a lack of innovation, but a misalignment between what is already happening and what institutions deem legible and worth value in that moment. Okay, so we're going to take about 60 to 90 seconds for this next part. I've got an activity for us. I'm going to share the link to a Padlet in the chat in just one second. In the QR code there, you can also scan that in order to get to the Padlet. In the Padlet, we are going to take some time to map the illusion. What gets called innovation and what existed before it? So on one side, you can put a GIF, you can draw something, you can write words, anything, be as creative as you would like to be. On what gets called innovation, on the other side, you can do the same, but what existed before it? This will be anonymous, so don't think that someone's going to see what you're writing. They're going to critique what you put there. So it is completely anonymous. So feel free to be as open and honest there as you will. And again, we'll take roughly 60 to 90 seconds. And I do ask that everyone provide at least one example. And if you have any issues getting to the Padlet, please let me know so I can assist with that. And while we're doing that, I'm going to play a little bit of another song. Okay, I hope everyone has some time to put things in there. If you did not or you're still working, you can still do that. But for the sake of the time that I've been given, we're going to pause here. I am looking at the Padlet and I appreciate what's coming through of what gets called innovation, doing something different, which is taken up by others, the first of something. So thank you all for sharing that. Um, so I also want to invite us to think of this. We're all researchers here and kind of think of this in an analysis framing. And what we're seeing here reflects something important. what we call into innovation often reflects processes of convergence, practices that already existed coming together in ways that are newly recognized, even if the idea, the practice, the thought itself is not new. And what appears new often depends on what was not previously acknowledged. Again, recognition shapes what we think is innovative, and that recognition is often shaped by power. So, my core claim here is that openness is not new, it's diasporic. It is something that has long moved through care, through our bodies, through relationships with one another, with the land, with animals, with spirits, and the exchanging of ideas, whether we have recognized that or it's been recognized or not. So, open education did not create openness, but it recognized certain forms of it while leaving others unacknowledged. I want to thank you all for being here. And also, hopefully, you enjoyed my a little bit of my playlist. I would say in another life, if I was not an academic, I absolutely would be a DJ. And so I also created a playlist for this talk that I'm also going to share in the chat. This playlist is an extension of the work that goes beyond this space. So I've created a playlist that for me carries the ideas that I spoke about in this presentation. Each track reflects movement, care, and diasporic knowledge in some way, shape, or form. And I hope that you all enjoy that on your own time. It is a YouTube link, YouTube playlist, so hopefully everyone is able to access that. And I will pause here and welcome your thoughts and questions.
It's a pleasure to share this space with the Gaussian community. And the topic of my presentation is about critical data and artificial intelligence literacy, so digital humanity. I am a doctoral alumni, and my advisors are Artopoulos and Fernandez. This is about my journey, my background. The more important thing here is I am from Argentina, National University of La Plata. I am a doctoral member of OGM, and I was lucky to participate in the very American Gaussian Hub. And first, I would like to deconstruct the keyword within my research title. My focus is on how to move from conventional digital literacy, which prioritizes the instrumental aspect of knowing how to use tools, to critical digital literacy, where it is essential to develop critical thinking and foster digital citizens. This involves in understanding and measuring the implication of algorithms, data, and large language models, going beyond computer programming from the perspective of the digital humanities. In this work, we propose working in education by opening the black box so that algorithms, data, and large language models do not program us. And the digital humanities in the context serve as the methodological bridge for moving beyond technical training and approaching technological with a critical sensibility. It is applying the humanities perspective to interrogate computational process. In this sense, digital humanities allow us to humanize data, transforming it from opaque members into social representation that can be analyzing and questioning. By integrating this approach into an open education, we provide both teacher and student with a framework to deconstruct the algorithmic black box, enable them to understand not only how technology works, but what meaning it constructs and how it impacts social justice and our communities. How integrate open education, open methodology, open educational resource, and is integrating critical data and artificial intelligence literacy in secondary education is a fundamental act of educational justice and equity, especially from our perspective in the global south. We focus on the 15 to 18 years old age group. This is a critical inflection point where students consolidate their abstract thinking, but there is an urgent reality. For many, this is the final level of compulsory education. It represents perhaps our last opportunity within the formal school system to provide the tool needed to develop a critical perspective on the technology that governs our lives. Central to this proposal is the development of disciplinary and critical computational thinking. We don't want to teach computing or programmation in isolation. We want to integrate it into every subject. To achieve this, we use digital humanities as a methodological bridge, specifically through techniques like distant reading. This allows students to step back from individual pieces of information and use data to isolate large-scale patterns, bias, and structures that are otherwise invisible. Other concept that is important to distinguish is close reading versus distant reading. We used to work with close reading, the traditional reading that I learned in the school, but now the important thing is to work with distant reading. That is a method that uses both quality and quantity method to analyze large corpus of text. For example, when you use a word cloud or graph of characters in a play or trend lines between other kinds of graph. With this in mind, we propose an alfabetizando ecosystem that is a place of work in Spanish between alfabetizar and the combination with data. Alfabetizando is that. And we propose a methodological approach in 3 phases. The 4A framework to design didactic sequence. Alfabetizando is an open platform to implement didactic sequence to retain, reuse, revise, remix, redistribute didactic sequence, and that support a community of practice. That's something that is very important for us. Alfabetizando info, finally, is an open repository to share open tutorials and sequence which can be made with any tool. Something important for us is that one barrier that we recognize in our South Global is the idiomatic barrier. Then a lot of tools were analyzed, and a lot of them are in English, and we need then a transparent way to work with teachers in Spanish language. And in a tool created and designed by teachers, with teachers, and with students. It's something very important, move to the EdTech, to the design with teachers and for teachers. Respect to the methodological approach that we propose, it has three phases. Each phase has an impact on the other. Offer teacher the option of taking on different roles these three phases. One teacher can be creator, evaluator, tutors, and could be the same person or different persons. This is very important when we think in an open education and how to reuse these kind of things. And separating the spaces make the platform more flexible, as each teacher or educational institution can customize the designs. Following that, each phase of the methodological approach include a set of components, and for each component, we provide a guideline to support teacher and students. Guidelines are public in Alfabetizando Info. Well, for instance, design involves select the topic, planification, data definition, and each of that component is a very complex thing because, for instance, data definition could be something like, well, this data is open, I can use it, or perhaps I have to make or produce the data to use in this kind of activities. Resolution is the phase that realize the student with some kind of guide to help student to use it. And the more important that this methodological approach is not associated with only one platform or digital tool. We propose a particular tool, but it could be used with any open platform. And finally, the third phase is the feedback. And the important thing here is that the tutor received the student assignment, reviewed it, and provide formative feedback based on rubric. They may also determine that it's important to adjust the sequence to improve a particular aspect. Then there are two kinds of feedback. You can improve not only to the resolution for the student, but you as a teacher could give feedback to the whole activity and propose a new version of that. Another element of our approach and our ecosystem is the 4A framework to design didactic sequences. When we was working in this kind of activity, we identified that close reading is very needed for everyone. We can supplant close reading with distant reading. This is a part of that. Then we propose 4 A's, que es appreciation, abstraction, audit, and argumentation. Appreciation with close reading, abstraction, carry out distant reading, audit, analyzing the text generated by artificial intelligence, and argumentation, defending the idea through discussion with classmates and teachers. This 4A framework NIFOR framework does not prescribe a specific order of use, rather that teachers have the flexibility to combine their activities according to their student needs and their pedagogical objectives. It is very important. This image I try to share with all of you that there are some kind of activity that are traditional. Then you can see appreciation or close reading has something traditional, and abstraction and audit has something more technological. Well, the idea of the 4A framework is to combine what we know to function with the new activities and how to add technology to this kind of sequence to develop in the students computational and critical thinking. Then the other thing of the ecosystem is Alfabetizando. It's an open platform that we developed for this project that allow users to create instructional sequences. And this incorporate close reading, data visualization for distant reading, and the writing argumentation fast. Oral argumentation is not included in the platform. And the for audit in the 4A's framework can be carried out using external platforms such as Notebook LM, for instance. Now, Alfabetizando only include 3 of the 4 A's. With this platform, teacher and student can register to work within their educational institution, and it enable them to implement the various phases of the methodological approach. Teacher can design assignments and provide feedback. Then when a teacher coming in the platform, login in the platform, have some kind of activity and option how to load data sets, generate courses, or design and implement activities or didactic sequence. And when a student login in the platform, can complete them and request feedback from teacher. If they had questions during the process, there are some mechanisms to question and response between teachers, tutors, and students. The platform is in Spanish because the focus is Spanish people. And inside the Alfabetizando platform, there are one option plus info. The platform provides access to a repository containing tutorial, lesson plans, open data sets, and suggestions for using other open platforms to develop critical literacy besides Alfabetizando. We work and we use this ecosystem to create some study cases. For instance, some created by teachers for secondary level students, another one created by teachers for pre-service teachers, because the focus of us as are the literacy to teacher and students, no? Respect to the teacher for secondary level student, we work with La Casa de Bernarda Alba, the Federico García Lorca. Is a very known book in Latin America that is used in the secondary level in 4 years in particular. And we made another sequence about Game of Thrones, the film, and where a student could analyze the season working with the graph of character of the film. It's a very interesting case. And respect to the activity created by teacher for pre-service teacher, we work with a linguistic study of author Motion Andrew with 3 poetry, Anna Frank Weiss, Pesinon, and Veteran. This is a teacher who is working with students of the English, pre-service English teacher. And in particular, we apply here for this example the 4A framework to develop the didactic sequence based on the La Casa de Bernarda Alba. And following the guidelines proposed for the 3 phases of the approach, the lesson plan is adapted for digital platform especially. And when we talk about the appreciation, we talk about to realize close reading and reading La Casa de Bernardo Alba. And before that, you could make abstraction using distant reading, for instance, with a graph of character, where say with character talk with another one, you can take some kind of ideas about the obra without the need to close reading. And finally, you can audit the text, making question to the generative artificial intelligence, for instance, Notebook LM, a question about the generative text. And last, you can make some kind of argumentation in a collaborative work in classroom. Something very important for us is that include the guys is the recommendation to develop rubrics for formative assessment. It's very important this feedback formative and not say it's good, it's bad. No, well, how you format this kind of thing. The guideline include a recommendation to develop rubric for formative assessment, specifically when knowledge has not been acquired, when it is the process or being acquired, and when it has been successfully acquired. And the items to look forward is about what happened with close reading, what happened with distant reading, what happened with audit and argumentation. The 4A framework elements. For instance, when you realize distant reading, well, evaluate data visualization and analysis. When audit, asking questions with the aim to improve the answer received and interrogating them, and then to preserve the prompts to analyze the level of the student to inquire in some question in particular. And argumentation, the idea is developing critical thinking in relation to different observations, depending on the type of analysis made. Finally, when we talk about distant reading, we talk at the beginning of critical disciplinary computational thinking. That is one of the focus of this work. Then we can think in computational thinking without code, without to use a program to write code. This is disciplinary because distant reading could help us to develop computational thinking, because you can make abstraction from traditional text to data graph, for instance. You can make decomposition because you took the book and discover node, character, age, and analyze patterns inside the obra, and you could make automatization through the visualization. This is another thing of study and work and develop computational thinking, because there are a lot of resistance in some student and teacher to work with language program. Then computational thinking is needed for all, and this is another thing, another way to develop it in classroom. Where are we going? Well, there is still much to be done. It's essential that this proposal reach diverse stakeholders so we can collectively refine in the pursuit of the true equity. While we are currently designing a new version of Alphabetizando to incorporate audit future, we know that technology is only part of the answer. At this stage, our most vital mission is to reach both the student and teacher in the classroom. We must empower educators to lead this change and provide students with the tools to look behind the screen. They need to understand how data can manipulate their choice and bias their future. Finally, this is about restoring agency to the classroom, ensuring that the next generation can critically navigate and reshape their own digital destiny. This is very important because we are working with uh, young people and discover this kind of bias and this kind of manipulation is very important. Well, thank you.
It's morning here, and I just wanted to start by saying that my study was conducted on the traditional and unceded territories of the Sinixt, Secwepemc, Ktunaxa, and Silks Okanagan nations, which is in the southeastern corner of British Columbia, Canada. This is where I live, work, study, and raise my children as an uninvited guest. And for this presentation, I also want to acknowledge the use of Google Gemini Pro to help create the slide deck templates and some of the flowcharts, which I then populated with my own content and openly licensed images. So before I share my slides, I'm going to start by establishing who I am and why this research matters to me. I'm here not just as a graduate student of Athabasca University, but as a widow, a solo mother of 2 school-age children, an educator, and an environmental advocate. So my worldview is shaped by the belief that education is the most powerful tool we have to protect our natural environment. I also believe in meaningfully addressing real-world issues that directly impact my family. So I'd like to do some visualization. You're welcome to go off screen, but I want you to close your eyes for a moment. And imagine you're packing what's called an emergency grab and go bag for your family, because the sky outside is thick with smoke again. Nearby, a child in middle school checks the air quality index before deciding whether it's safe to go to school or even to step outdoors. For many of us, this isn't hypothetical, it's our lived experience. Whether it's wildfires, floods, heat domes, or droughts, these are no longer rare events. They define our new reality. And you can now open your eyes, because I'd like you to picture a different scene, a classroom of 11-year-olds learning about the environment and how to care for it. They're learning how to act, adapt, and advocate. They care because they're directly impacted. And these are the students who will grow into future leaders, voters, and change makers. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I'll share the results of my research, Teachers as Changemakers, analyzing open educational resources for environmental education for grades 5 to 7 in British Columbia. This study explored how OER can enhance environmental and sustainability education for students in these grades, and how existing resources align with BC curriculum for British Columbia. Before I outline today's presentation, I'll start by setting the context. British Columbia's curriculum mentions environmental learning and highlights social awareness and responsibility as key competencies. But a gap exists between policy and practice. Many BC educators lack access to high quality, locally relevant resources, and often they don't have the time, funding, or expertise to find and develop their own materials. A solution to this problem is the adoption of OER. UNESCO, of course, defines these as learning, teaching, and research materials in any format and medium that reside in the public domain or have been released under an open license. So they are free, accessible, and most importantly, can be adapted to specific contexts and redistributed to others. My research focused on the intersection of OER and environmental education for grades 5 to 7. And for our remaining time, I'll share the purpose of my study, the significance of this specific age group, gaps in the current literature, and my methodology, results, findings, and future opportunities. By the end, you should understand the current landscape of OER for environmental education in British Columbia and my recommendations for its improvement. And while this study focused on resources that meet British Columbia curriculum, my research approach, methodology, results, outcomes, and recommendations are applicable internationally. So the purpose of my study was to explore the availability and suitability of OER specifically for environmental education in these grades in British Columbia. Accordingly, the central questions of my research were, to what extent do open educational resources for environmental education exist for grades 5 to 7? And how well do they align with British Columbia curriculum standards? To answer this, I investigated 3 sub-questions. What is actually out there right now? And do these resources match the learning standards in the British Columbia curriculum? And then where are the gaps between what is available and what is required? So why does this specific research matter right now? First, it supports the delivery of environmental and sustainability education to address global crises such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. This aligns with many of UNESCO's Sustainable Development Goals, which work towards peace and sustainable living for all, while ensuring the protection of the planet. Second, it addresses the gap in teacher resources. As previous studies indicated, teachers are overburdened, and this research produced a curated list of resources that teachers can actually use. Third, it addressed a pivotal age group. And speaking of which, you may be wondering why I focused on grades 5 to 7. Several studies indicated that the ideal ages for developing environmental literacy and introducing social action are between 10 and 14. Coincidentally, this is the same age range as my children. So these children, including mine, are forming their values, critical thinking, and sense of responsibility. They are intellectually curious, socially aware, and emotionally ready to grapple with complex issues. Greta Thunberg, for example, learned about climate change at this age. And as many of you may know, within a few years, she inspired one of the largest youth-led global movements in history. When environmental education reaches this group, it can shape not only what they understand, but what they do about it and who they become. There's a saying by Baba Diome that captures the essence of why environmental and sustainability education is important. In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will only understand what we are taught. In looking at existing literature, environmental and sustainability education is recognized globally as one of the most essential interdisciplinary fields. It helps learners make informed decisions on how to take care of the environment and motivates them to take action to protect it. However, the literature highlights significant barriers to teaching this. In Canada, despite its importance and Canadian commitments to integrate environmental and climate education, progress has been slow at the administration level, both federally and provincially. As I've said earlier, teachers lack access to resources and don't have the time or expertise to create their own. And really, teachers are intimidated by topics like climate change, which are highly controversial and political. Not to mention, there's very little clarity on how existing environmental education resources align with curriculum standards, where to find quality materials that are locally relevant, and how teachers can integrate these materials effectively into their specific learning contexts. Teachers want to empower their students, but they need the right tools. And this is where the literature suggests that OER can provide the solution. As mentioned already today, and in studies, that they show that OER allows for equity, scalability, contextualization, And there's the potential for improvement through remixing, modification, and adaptation. Despite these benefits and the fact that OER worked towards UNESCO's goal of ensuring quality education for all, there's been limited uptake of OER use in K-12 education as compared to in higher education. OER in the kindergarten to grade 12 or K-12 context is both underutilized and under-researched. So this study addressed a gap in scholarship. Likewise, I've only come across a very recent presentation that examined OER as a tool for delivering, adapting, and sharing environmental education in the K-12 context. This also highlights the importance of my research. To date, OER, specifically for environmental and sustainability education, is an underrepresented and under-researched area. Thus, my study was both relevant and timely. So to conduct this research, I adapted a pragmatic worldview where pragmatism refers to a focus on a practical solution to address a real-world problem. I used qualitative research design and conducted a document analysis. This involved 4 phases, starting with the first phase of developing criteria to make sure OER met the 5 R's of openness, namely the ability for users to retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. I also developed a checklist to verify OER alignment with the 4 areas of BC curriculum, and these include core competencies, big ideas, learning standards, and the First Peoples principles of learning. Both items I developed were verified and validated by OER experts and experienced BC educators. I then searched major repositories, OER repositories, such as OER Commons, Subject to Climate, and Share My Lesson, as well as using Google search to find different Creative Commons licensed resources. So these were used to find resources that relate to environmental education for grades 5 to 7. And I used targeted terms such as climate change, sustainable development, conservation, and environmental literacy. These results were compiled on an Excel spreadsheet. Next, I incorporated an AI tool called Google Gemini Gem. And this was recommended by a University of Calgary professor who specializes in AI that's used in conjunction with educational standards and curriculum development. He suggested using Google Gem to run very targeted one-by-one queries of websites and PDF information for each OER to determine their alignment with BC curriculum and to identify other pertinent information. For example, identifying the Creative Commons license, which determines that level of access and openness to users. The final phase was to look at trends, gaps, and patterns in the available OER to come up with actionable recommendations for improving OER distribution in British Columbia for delivering environmental education. While searching for OER for environmental education, significant gaps in OER repository usability became evident. Of the 12 repositories recommended by OER experts, 8 were excluded due to limited search functionality, a lack of K-12 materials, a focus on textbooks only, and a poor user experience where sites were challenging to navigate and not at all intuitive. Another issue encountered during the research process was the limitation on resource openness, where 37% of the 226 resources that I initially found had either a traditional copyright or a no derivative clause, which makes it so that users cannot change or modify the resource to meet the needs of their local environmental contexts or learning needs. Therefore, 61 resources did not fully constitute OER and were excluded from my curated list. Finally, the use of Google Gem for automated analysis was variable in terms of reliability. And there was this tension between my environmental values and ethics and the energy demands of AI. First, to reconcile this tension, I took a very intentional approach. I limited my AI usage to the development of high impact, open access prompts that can be used repeatedly. And I made sure these prompts were thoughtful, specific, and detailed in order to minimize the number of iterations required to produce a high quality output. When it comes to reliability, as we know, AI can produce biased results and misinformation. To reduce this likelihood, I not only provided these detailed prompts, but I also processed small batches of PDFs at a time. And to assess the tool's reliability, I manually cross-checked 13% or 21 of the 165 results after some back and forth with my supervisors. And this was the biggest surprise because the AI tool showed a high degree of inter-rater reliability when it came to identifying alignment with British Columbia curriculum areas. Google Gem corresponded with my manual analysis 96% of the time. Now, I attribute this to the very broad conceptual nature of British Columbia curriculum, whereby finding alignment between a resource and a curriculum area is straightforward and somewhat subjective. On the flip side, Google Gem was inaccurate half the time when it came to identifying the correct Creative Commons license type, the resource author, and the year created. Moving on to other findings from my research, these were generally as expected with a few surprises. First, there are hundreds of environmental and sustainability resources available over the internet. Many of these are freely available. However, as I mentioned, they fall under traditional copyright or contain a no derivative clause, which restricts the ability to modify the contents. Fortunately, I found 165 resources that met all aspects of openness. And as this chart indicates, 96% of these aligned with 3 out of the 4 British Columbia curriculum areas. The one area of exception was the First Peoples Principles of Learning, which were only 90% of resources were aligned. And it's worth noting that this was actually higher than anticipated. Another shortcoming worth highlighting is that OER found were widely spread across multiple platforms. Furthermore, although OER availability and alignment with BC curriculum were high, as shown in this chart, they were not distributed across all subject areas. In this pie chart, you'll see that they were mainly found in the sciences, social studies, and English areas. Before moving on to my recommendations, it's important to share this study's limitations. Normally, document analysis is used to supplement data or verify findings. But in this case, it was used as a standalone method. Based on the narrow research question, the focus on textual content, and the fact that this was a master's level thesis, this methodology was deemed acceptable. And despite starting with 12 possible OER repositories, I ended up only using 4 of them due to the limitations I mentioned earlier. I recognize that a greater number of resources likely exist on other sites that are entirely relevant, suitable, and applicable for delivery now and into the future. It's also worth noting that the quality of the resources was not considered in terms of instructional design and opportunities for deeper learning, accessibility, and level of student engagement. I see resource quality as something that is best determined by the users and educators themselves, and of course, the audience for whom the resource is intended. And it's important for me to acknowledge the technical limitation of using AI. Although Google Gem achieved 96% accuracy in identifying alignment with British Columbia curriculum, this may have been exaggerated. Again, British Columbia curriculum is quite general. Therefore, Google Gem may have given false positives based solely on keywords or broad themes found within the resources. Based on my findings and research limitations, I recommend a three-pronged approach, which aligns with UNESCO's Dubai Declaration on Open Educational Resources. Number one, I recommend improving metadata standards for current OER so that they can be more easily found or discoverable using robust search filters. I also recommend establishing a single, curated, centralized, accessible, and sustainable K-12 repository. And this would mean that both government policies and funding must be in place. Finally, I suggest providing teacher training to develop not only digital and copyright literacy, but also environmental pedagogy. In this way, teachers become further change makers, and this training can be done in a similar manner as the introduction and integration of Indigenous-focused education across British Columbia, which took place in 2019. And to be honest, I also see a place for generative AI tools to assist with this training process, especially when it comes to helping educators adapt and modify existing resources, which they can then translate, summarize, simplify, and use to generate learning checks. Now, my research is really designed to be used, not shelved. Not only is my research process, thesis, and data openly licensed, but I've also collaborated with OER Commons. I found this repository to have the best search functionality and metadata standards. Together with OER Commons, I have populated their Climate Hub with a British Columbia specific collection of resources. So I can now share a link to a unique, curated, and validated list of OER. And as you can see, I've listed some of the organizations that I'll be doing that with. In addition, I'm in the process of submitting proposals, or have sent proposals in now to present at various conferences, as shown here, including this very wonderful GoGN member research special. I see several opportunities for future research and development. For example, given that resource quality was not accounted for, a mixed method study can be done to look at the impacts of these resources in terms of deeper learning, increased awareness, and sense of stewardship. Likewise, generative AI can be explored as a means of adapting OER content. I heard a recent talk by David Wiley, who suggested creating openly licensed AI prompts that enable learners to engage with chatbots as part of an interactive educational session. Most OER for environmental and sustainability education are geared towards the sciences. I see this as an opportunity for curriculum developers like me to expand this to other subject areas, especially math, the arts, and physical education. I think this is best achieved through collaboration with local Indigenous peoples so that the First Peoples principles of learning and Indigenous knowledge systems are integrated from the very beginning. Finally, access to OER is limited because it requires a reliable internet access. However, organizations like Learning Equality have derived ways of providing offline digital access to OER. This type of initiative should be promoted, and it addresses several of UNESCO's sustainable development goals, including reducing inequalities, access to quality education, and climate action. To conclude, OER really represent a promising solution as accessible resources that are reusable, adaptable, and can be tailored to specific contexts and used across disciplines. This makes them ideal for teaching about current and local issues such as climate change, loss of biodiversity, sustainable development, and plastic pollution. My research has shown that while a large number of environmental education resources exist, they are widely spread across the internet, and many fall under traditional copyright. This spread of materials and limitations on their use are significant barriers for educators who are seeking adaptable materials for their classrooms. However, of the OER I identified, there's great potential for British Columbia K-12 teachers to incorporate environmental and sustainability education, knowing that they align with provincial curriculum. I'd like to thank you all, and a special thanks go to my supervisors, Dr. Connie Blomgren and Dr. Cynthia Blodgett-Griffin, to the GoGN Canada Hub members, and to GoGM itself for inviting me to present. So I welcome your questions.